Hello, everybody. We're waiting for participants to get a chance to log on, and we'll be starting our webinar in just a moment. Well, great. Again, welcome everyone. We are excited to have you join us today on our Professional Advisor webinar. We do these on a monthly basis. Today's topic is real estate and other unique gifts. As the presentation is held, if you have any questions, please log those into the Q&A. At the end of the session, we will go through those questions and answer them. If there are things that we don't get to, we will respond to you afterwards. So do know that your questions are important to us. With that, I'm going to turn us over to Steve Jewell, President and CEO of CommunityGiving.
Thank you, Carol. And welcome everybody. We're glad to have you joining us today live, or if you happen to be listening to the recorded version, which will be available once this is over. We're happy that you're tuning into this particular webinar. We're excited to talk about an asset class that is not always thought about when we talk about charitable giving. And so today, what we hope to do is maybe just spark some ideas with you and with maybe others that you know by simply sharing stories. And story in this case today is a wonderful story of a gift of real estate that came in and was liquidated and is now doing great charitable work because of these generous donors. But to kick us off, we're really excited to have with us David Werschay. David is the board chair for RealEstateGiving, formerly known as the Minnesota Real Estate Foundation, and he's also CEO of Werschay Homes. Werschay Homes is Werschay Homes, and its superior level of professionalism, craftsmanship, and innovation was founded in 2003 by David and Molly Werschay. David entered into the home building industry in the early 1990s and played a significant role in creating one of the largest and premier home builders in central Minnesota. David and his wife Molly, an interior designer, lead Werschay Homes with the mission of building homes with the best practices available and offering unparalleled service. In addition to that, I know both David and Molly are very involved in the community and also generous donors. And in his role as chair of RealEstateGiving, it's our pleasure to work with David. And David, thank you for taking time to be with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, excellent. Thanks, Steve. Great intro. You must have pulled that off the internet somewhere because it sounded really nice. Yeah, thanks. You know, my wife and I have been in the St. Cloud area. We're both born and raised here, and you know, as time brought it together, we got into the real estate business. We never were. It wasn't something in our family or anything, but once we did get into the business and we found that you know we had such a love and passion for it, ultimately we ended up starting our own design build company. Like Steve said, in 2003. Well, through that process, I was introduced to the Community Foundation in a couple different facets, and it had interest, but you know, starting your own business, you don't have a ton of money, and so being philanthropic with the money you don't have is a challenge. Then I found that there was this opportunity or another potential way to be philanthropic, and that was through real estate, and obviously that's what I knew and what I had a passion for, and Steve asked me to be on the board for what was then the Minnesota Real Estate Foundation. Now it's RealEstateGiving. Well, when I got on that, I had no idea what the concept of donating or being philanthropic with real estate meant. And when you get into the inner workings of how to donate a piece of real estate, it's confusing. it doesn't, it's not a cut and dry, follow these 2 or 3 steps. And I see Fred smiling because he knows that's true. But so it took me a number of years just to really learn the benefits and how it works. But once it happens, it kind of clicks, and it became, really, really interesting on how it does work. So, how I got involved was, a weak moment when Steve said, "Would you be on the board?" And I said, "Sure." And that's usually how everybody gets on a board. But, learning about it and then learning about the potential gifts of real estate. And so I always talk about, my elevator speech on what is the Minnesota Real Estate Foundation, what is real estate giving. I found myself on other nonprofit boards and committees who are doing, major fundraising, and they continually go to the wells of people that have, a large wealth and looking for cash donations. And it's really fun to bring up the idea of, hey, has anyone considered donating real estate to be able to give to this charity? And you'd be amazed at how many times something comes out of that. So, I always talk about the idea of the amount of opportunities there are. So there's farms, there's cabins, there's family properties, and I give examples, but oftentimes people are not necessarily cash rich to be able to donate to their favorite charities and nonprofits. And the idea doesn't dawn on them that we have a cabin up north, we have this land, we have grandma and grandpa's farm, as amazing potential gifts and the benefits of donating them. I usually try to talk about, in someone may, I'll just kind of touch on it. I always say talk to your tax accountant, but there's some excellent tax advantages to this. So if let's just say it's a family cabin that somebody has, and we've got 3 siblings, and they're all ultimately going to end up owning this, and they all have their own cabin, so they really don't need it. So mom and dad can sell this cabin for, $200,000, and then they can pay the taxes on that and take the income on it, and then take the remaining money that they have and be philanthropic with it. Or they could take that $200,000 cabin and gift that directly to an organization like RealEstateGiving. And then we accept it. And they get the entire they get to realize the $200,000 as and these are general terms in this process, but they get to realize the full potential of the $200,000 that they can then put into the community foundation and gift to as many different nonprofit charities as they want. And so I try to, and it took me a long time to really understand this and figure it out, but to really make it simple, there's some great tax advantages and estate planning advantages that go along with this. And I think we're going to hear more about that later. So some of the, the different gifts that we see, we've done a pretty good job of not accepting the piece of real estate that nobody could sell because it's not buildable and it's a half swamp. And so we've really over the years kind of created a litmus test of the properties that we will accept and that we want to accept. But the advantages with every transaction are different. So not exactly sure who all of our audience is, but if we have professionals out there, it's great to keep this concept in the forefront of planning with your clients. And like I said, there's no formula that works on every piece of property or every piece of real estate. I mean, there's a new formula that's created on everyone because people's needs are different, people's wants are different. Is it a single owner? Is it a family that owns it? Is there any debt that's connected to it? So there's a lot of different things that can get involved in this, but the upside potential on what people can do is awesome. And oftentimes it's just not at the forefront of our minds when we think about, gee, I'd really like to give, but our estate just doesn't have the funds to do that. And we forget that we have this real estate and the awesome potential it has. So that's just kind of a quick, like I said, elevator speech. I love this stuff. I love real estate, and one of the things that I found in my business that's always worked, and my employees and stuff always laugh about it, but to be successful in this business, you have to be creative. And you have to get creative. And I always say I have to solve other people's problems before mine are solved. And I have to help other people with their problems before I get help. And that's what's so neat about this is the creativity that goes into every single transaction. Every piece of real estate out there has a potential for gifting and can have a legacy behind it. So tons of fun. I love it. Got questions, please fire away in our chat. And I look forward to answering some of those and hearing some of the great stories we're going to hear about. If there's anything I missed, Steve, jump in, tee me up.
Well, David, thank you so much. And I love your analogy about being a problem solver and helping other people address their problems, because that's really what it's all about, is being creative and trying to help people both address some of their problems, but also helping in our role at the community foundation that we serve and through Real Estate Giving is how do we help people continue to be generous and provide their favorite charities and support them in a variety of different ways. So thank you so much, David. We're gonna hold on questions from the audience until after our next guest, but I want to introduce two individuals who we've had the pleasure of knowing for many years. I'm just going to quickly give you their bio, and then we're going to hear from them about what they were able to do with the property and real estate that they owned. So Ellen was born on a farm in Steele County, Minnesota, and graduated from Austin High School and attended Macalester College on a full scholarship where she and Fred met. She majored in German and went on to teach high school German for 50 years, the last 35 of which were in Princeton, Minnesota. Fred followed Ellen into education and was a sixth grade teacher, elementary and middle school principal, and superintendent. While superintendent, Fred established community foundations in Eden Valley, Watkins, as well as Foley, with the assistance of the Central Minnesota Community Foundation. After retiring as superintendent, Fred led the Minnesota Rural Education Association for 9 years, retiring once again in June. And 20 some years ago, Fred reminded me that we met at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon. It was just one of those fortuitous events where you sit down and you don't know the person next to you. And thankfully, I sat next to Fred because he is a wonderfully caring individual, and quickly learned that he had a desire and interest in helping people give back, which is what we do at Community Giving and the foundations we serve. So Ellen and Fred, welcome. We're really glad to have you both with us today. And I thought we might just start by having each of you tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you grew up and why you chose education. You know, you're both in education. Why did you choose that as a career?
I'm Ellen. All those years I spent on a farm in southern Minnesota where all of the dirt is black. When I came up here, I didn't realize people had to try and grow crops in brown dirt. Brown dirt. Dirt is supposed to be black. It was beautiful, but the house had no running water. So we were kind of poor in any way except land. But I was hardworking. I got the scholarship to McAllister. I got this wonderful education because a whole bunch of people gave scholarship money to McAllister. And McAllister prided itself on making sure everybody had some money from them so that they could claim it on their wonderful brochure I've seen every year since. And then this was such a long time ago. I don't even know who would remember this. About 100 years ago, women didn't have a lot of choices. And so between nursing and teaching, I thought teaching was slightly more reasonable. So I went into teaching and
Wonderful.
stayed there. We just kept moving schools. But I had a wonderful time because you can joke with kids and you can kind of, I don't know, mess with their minds while you're trying to teach them something. You know, it was great fun. But I'm done now.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ellen.
Mhm.
Fred?
Yes, and I met Ellen at McAllister, obviously, but I'm from the East Coast, actually born in New York City and grew up on the East Coast and graduated from high school in Michigan and got a substantial scholarship to McAllister, such that my father said, well, it's the same cost as a state college, so what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'll try private school, thinking I'd be here for a couple of years. Well, here I am, 50 years later. Yeah, that's how it happens. But I actually followed Ellen into education because I was working in a hardware store selling appliances and other things, and said, this is not going to work. And she was having so much fun. She really does like to mess with teenagers' minds. And as she says, it was so easy. She was always a step ahead of them. So I went back to school at Moorhead, got my education, and the rest is history. I did a nice job summarizing.
Wow. So have you stayed in touch with students as well? Has that been something each of you have done?
Heck yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I had wonderful comments when they put my retirement up on the school's Facebook page. So I got to copy those forever. In my wheelchair, I can continue to read them.
Wow. Fred, anything to add?
No,
Oh.
not so much, but I do run into players on the pickleball court who were students in my middle school here. And you Mr. Nolan? Yeah, I am. You might not remember me, but some I do, and most I don't. But yeah, still do.
That's great. Well, teaching is kind of another form of philanthropy. You're passing on something to somebody else, and fun to be able to stay in touch and see what they all have done with the gifts that you've been a part of helping make available to them. So it's a wonderful, wonderful profession, wonderful career. As you think about, your career, and because I've known the two of you, you were not just generous in your career and giving back to students, but you've been generous in your charitable giving too, and philanthropy and giving money back to people or to organizations. That doesn't just happen. What do you see as how you develop those charitable inclinations over your lifetime? How did that grow and develop in your past?
Well, for most of our lives, we didn't have enough money to consider giving anything away. And if there was ever a lot of money sitting around, Fred would decide to go back to school, and there would go a couple thousand here and there. But then eventually we realized we could give things away, and I had a lot to pay forward because so much had been given to me that I needed to do that. We don't have children, and so we want to give something to someone.
Right.
Neat.
Right. And when I was growing up, my father insisted or taught on the 10-10 rule, 10-10-80. You save 10, you give 10, and you use 80% for yourself. Even when I had a paper route, had to do that. And so that's always been in my family. And as Ellen said, originally when we first started out, we didn't have much. And we've been very fortunate. I like to joke that Ellen's been a cheap date for 50 years. Still clips coupons, and so we don't have. I'm the one who spends money on hobbies more than she does.
This is true.
Yeah.
And so we're just been very fortunate, and it's very gratifying to see people do good things with your gifts, especially young people who could go into college who may not have been able to.
Sure. Wonderful. Well, after, a period of time and you not only contributed and shared out of your financial resources, but you realized you had this other asset, or other assets, plural actually, that you could maybe gift. Can you tell us about how did you think about real estate and the opportunity to give real estate away?
Well, nothing was even considered until our mothers had both died. Because until then, we had mothers with no spouses to take care of them. And at any given time, we were worried that everything that we had would go to taking care of them. And then in the same month of the same year, they both died. And there we were saying, oh my gosh, is this ever nice that they both died? What an awful thought. Oh my gosh, terrible. So then we started thinking of the more positive aspects of losing them both in August of 2010.
But because it was kind of a unique situation, as David said, each of these is unique. Because Ellen's mother divorced her father back in 1970. Yeah. No, he divorced him even earlier than that. She divorced her.
Doesn't matter.
Anyway, he died in about 1970. So Ellen inherited half a farm in her black soil Steele County. And her sister wanted her portion right away. And so we swallowed hard and bought her out at a huge amount of money, okay, of all the $1,000 an acre. And she inherited her $600. And so after 2010, we were getting cash rent off the farm. And we had sold parts of it before to help build the house we're in and other things. But we had a substantial part left. But because land was going at that time for like $8,000 an acre, can you spell capital gain? It was kind of like it was a dead asset. We didn't dare sell it because we'd lose half of it for capital gains and or a substantial portion of it. And we were getting cash rent that frankly we didn't need at the time. And then I calculated our retirement income, not right then, but working forward with some spreadsheets and work from TRA and our tax accountant and said, we really don't need that income in the future either. We have other assets we've been building up. And so that's when we decided to look into it. And of course, I knew you, which really made a big difference through this whole process, Steve. You were very good, and our relationship went back before that, and we established those community foundations. And so I remember at some point talking with you about this, and that's when you said you have the Real Estate Foundation.
Well, it was a wonderful conversation, especially when we hear from people who are, and this often is the case, just thinking, looking for ideas. And naturally, one of the things we often do is encourage all people that we talk to about this is to talk to their professional advisors, because the professional advisors are there, their attorney, accountant, financial planner, are there to help guide you in those relationships. Our role is often just to spark ideas or encourage people to think about the charitable aspect of it. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about your professional advisor team and how you worked with them to kind of endorse and support, encourage you on this path.
Well, really don't. As Ellen said, I'm the financial planner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good thing I trust him, or we'd be in real trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no way around spreadsheets and kind of stay up on things. And so that the two people who are most important were my tax accountant, because I need to know the rules on charitable donation. Like it's only 30% of your income, but you do have 7 years carryover. So the math there was important because the income had to be high enough that 7 times 30% of that was actually going to absorb the amount of the sale. And I felt relatively comfortable about that. And the other thing, Steve, you came up with a solution of having a donor advised fund, because we didn't want to designate a specific charity at that time. Okay. But we knew we'd seen land prices go up and come down and go up, and now they're going. I was afraid they're going to start coming down. So it was important to kind of sell toward the peak at that time. But you suggested a donor advised fund. So we started that, and we started a scholarship fund for Ellen's world language, so she can give a scholarship to Princeton students in world language. And so having the destination was an important piece of the puzzle, and you were very helpful.
Great, wonderful. Well, and that's, again, sometimes how it happens is that it is wonderful to see professionals endorse and support this, the attorneys, especially the accountants, and we always encourage people to talk to their accountants. And some, in your case, we have all types of donors who are very skilled and do all their own accounting, and then some that work with other firms, and so we just want to make sure everybody's clear up front with what the expectation is, and that's very important. What concerns, if any, did you have as you were embarking on this journey and thinking about it? And in particular, Ellen, this was potentially very meaningful, I would guess, because this was in the family.
Well, not only was it in the family, but when I was 7, before my parents divorced, I was put on a tractor to go out and help drive the hay wagon, because my dad was throwing hay bales onto that hay wagon. And so as soon as your feet are down in the mud or knee deep in the ditch, all of a sudden you have a different kind of connection. This wasn't just a cabin where we went up and had a wonderful vacation time. This was stuff I had been involved in. And so that was kind of a serious thing. And for me, the issue has always been, I have to trust somebody. And Fred already had a relationship with you, Steve. And so we had somebody that I knew and could picture. And aren't you the one that mentioned Mark Oswood? So I had some connections with you. Yeah.
Mark, yes.
Okay.
He was a childhood friend, and we'll have to send him a copy of this webinar. So
would you please do that and mention?
I will.
Trust is important to me, because when you grow up with no money at all, you have this need to feel that you can trust somebody.
Mark Oswood was a star pupil for Ellen.
Well, Mark would have been a star pupil for anyone. Wow,
Yes.
Remember him now. Woo, cool.
Mark is a physician down in the Twin Cities, and so Mark, when you get a chance to listen to this, I hope you can get an opportunity to do so. But right, Ellen, I think that's wonderful, and it is always fun for us to make these direct connections. All of our executive directors at the various foundations we work with, I think they stress and are always they're wonderful at growing and building those relationships, because that's what it's about. And our goal always is just to help you find ways to give back to the communities that, and places where and things that are important to you. So any other concerns? Fred, did you have any concerns going into this at all? Or?
Well, number one was Ellen had to be comfortable with this. I mean, because I wasn't sure she wanted to hang on to the farm, in the back there, all those kind of things. So that was number one. And the second thing was kind of, where is the destination? Okay, if we want to do charitable giving, but don't want to define it right now, that's why the donor advised fund was so critical. And then what were the mechanics? I mean, actually, how did it work? So I understood the process. But Ellen's concerns were number one.
Great, wonderful. Well, once you started down this path, I mean, I believe we shared with you kind of our steps, because we have some kind of very specific steps we work through to make sure we cover all of our bases. We have a checklist, and so we started down that process, and I can remember a number of things from that. But from your perspective, how did that work for you? Starting down that process, and the paperwork that needed to be done, and some of the other things on that checklist. How did it all work for you?
Fine. I mean, once we had the building blocks in place and we knew where the funds were going to end up, you walked us through it, and we then signed the deeds so that the property actually went to the real estate foundation. Okay. And then we just sat back and waited. It's
Yeah.
pretty simple from our point of view.
Oh, good. That's what we hope. That's our goal, is really basically to make it easy for all of you. But were there things maybe or bumps in the road that surprised you in this process?
No, it actually worked better than I thought, because someone in the Real Estate Foundation found a broker who actually set up a private auction for the farmland. And that actually ended up driving the price up almost to the point that Ellen was no concern. But the person who bought it seemed to be doing well. His son is now farming the land, and he has a nice home on a lake down there. So I don't think he was hurt in the long run. But he was a long-time renter and really wanted to purchase it, because those are familiar with farmland. If you've got 80 acres or 50 acres or 120 close to where you're farming, that may only come up once in a lifetime. And so that tends to push that price up, especially if you have, as farms get larger and people want more economical farming, they don't want to be driving 5 miles down the road to another 80. They want that kind of right next door or as close to possible. And so farmland, as David talked about, is its own unique animal in terms of how it gets priced. And so whoever you had the broker in the Real Estate Foundation, where you contracted the broker, and that was brilliant. It actually raised more money than we expected.
Well, we, as you saw at the beginning of the webinar with having David as the chair, we have a wonderful board who make up the Real Estate Giving board that serve with David. And so one of the things that does happen behind the scenes is, because we have this board who have specific expertise in the area of real estate, it really helps us and helps us help our donors, because we can throw a question out and immediately we'll get responses back and forth on this, whatever the issue might be. And so that's one of the real benefits in creating this focus or concentration in real estate, are our wonderful volunteers, because they don't get paid anything. David, as we were joking a little bit beforehand, has served several years on this board, and we keep saying we're going to double their pay, which sorry, David, ends up being double of what, but they give up their time because it's the way they give back. And if you go to our website, realestategiving.org, you can actually see the members of that board, and they're wonderful people, all working and helping and volunteering to give back and help us with those questions. In particular, on this transaction, I'll put a little plug in for who we helped get some advice. And again, a board member, I believe, recommended that we talk with, it was US Bank's Agricultural Services.
Right.
And they have a whole division, a farm division at US Bank. And what we were able to do in talking to them, because this was in Steele County, we talked with the person who covers that region in the farm area. And as they talked about it and how farmland was in demand, the recommendation was to facilitate working with an attorney in Steele County, a bidding process. And so I think there was, it was nice to see the results come in from that. Now, one of the things that was on that checklist, of course, was for the donor to get an appraisal. And so that was something that that you all did. And so we had a rough idea. You need that for deduction purposes. But we were pleasantly surprised then, right? That the bidding price came in actually above the appraisal, right? If I remember correctly. So that was wonderful to see. And why we get excited is it just means more money for charity. So it's fun to see that. So any other things you recall from the transaction? Then just, once we had the property, went through the checklist to make sure we, received the property, and that, of course, we have to make sure there's no environmental concerns and all of that. But given that was farmland, that wasn't a concern at all. And then you had the appraisal, and then we went and, you deeded the property to at that time Minnesota Real Estate Foundation. And that's when the sale actually took place from Minnesota Real Estate Foundation, right. Working with that attorney to have the property out on bids. And then the property was sold from Real Estate Giving to the ultimate buyer. So that's how the process worked on our side of it. And again, it seemed to work very smooth, because really, sometimes you get surprises with real estate, as David said, that there's all types of different transactions, but in this particular case, it seemed to flow fairly well. Any other comments about that?
No, if someone's thinking about it, after you've done your homework and you've got all the things we've talked about before, and you actually need it over, just be patient. It can take a while. First the foundations figure out how they're going to process the sale, and then go through that work, and then of course the settlement at the end, and then takes off. So just be patient. It's not going to happen overnight, but you will. At least we were pleasantly surprised and gratified in the end.
Great. With real estate, we know sometimes donors and working with their advisors consider what we call life income gifts. These are like charitable trusts that provide an income stream, and use that as a gifting technique. Did you explore any of those options?
No, as I said, I did the math on our income. We really didn't need it for income.
Yeah.
We'd rather give the money away while we're alive than have it happen after.
Absolutely.
So we didn't do this.
That's great. And that is, again, we usually cover that with donors and sometimes talk about those. But again, each individual situation is unique. And in your case, working with the two of you, it seemed that income wasn't as a concern. You made provisions for that already. And so being able to gift it now. And so maybe you could tell us just a little bit about, what the impact has been as far as once now, the proceeds came in. What have you been able to do with the proceeds from the gifting of the real estate?
The scholarships to my world language students at Princeton. They are required to write an essay about what world language has done for them and will do in the future. So I get to read all these fascinating, sometimes really well-written essays. Sometimes they're really poorly written essays. And then I get little notes from the scholarship people who say, several people looked at your scholarship and decided it really wasn't worth it to spend time to write an essay if it was only $1,000. And then I say, good riddance. $1,000 is of no use to you. You live in a different world from mine.
Do you ask them to write it in German?
Oh dear, no. Especially since right now it's half of it's in Spanish, because the German program ended with me.
Oh, okay. So Spanish
now
is
it's Spanish kids. Yep.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. So
no, and we use it for some of our regular giving, which really works out nicely with the SALT limitations, because we now can alternate giving from our income versus not, and so we can just up the charitable donations from the foundation in those off years, if you know what I mean. But I kind of joke because Ellen's kind of like a mini Melinda Gates. I mean, she can decide to give. She gives especially to pet.
Yep.
entities.
Yep. Rough Start Rescue in Princeton. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Wonderful. So having that flexibility, the donor advised fund piece of this has
Right.
provided that opportunity to,
Exactly.
just give when you want to give.
Right. And it's it's a large amount of money to us, but it's not large enough to like endow a chair or anything like that. It's just not that. It's not that big a deal. I mean, if somebody had that amount of real estate, say a whole farm or a whole quarter, yeah, you could really think big.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. So how about in your overall estate plan? How now has this impacted, and did it impact your estate planning that you might have done?
No, my estate plan was I got through teaching for 50 years and now I get to give it away. That's my plan. So
Wonderful.
basic. The rest is spreads.
Again, we don't have any children, which is again a unique situation, and so our estate plan is a series of specified gifts, and the rest of it is eventually going to end up in a scholarship fund at McAllister. So this is kind of the way to do it in advance, on a variety of things, and not wait till after you're dead. So
Sure.
And the nice thing about the donor advised was if I had been asked to decide where my money was going when I sold the farm, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So the donor advised where I can decide today that this is worth $1,000 of my money. That's kind of important to me, that flexibility.
That's great. Great. What advice would you have for others who might be considering real estate in particular as a possible gifting asset?
Well, some of the things we've talked about, do your due diligence.
Mhm.
We look into it, and ask questions, find the relationships that are important. And Steve, I got to tell you, the Real Estate Foundation, when you were at CMCF and CommunityGiving, it was great. And I worked with Carol, et cetera. And so it's built, make sure you have those solid relationships. And then we think we've just really been fortunate to be able to be in a situation. Very thankful that we were in a position and had the resources, such as the Community Foundation, the Real Estate Foundation, to actually pull us off. And that's why we started those community foundations, if you recall, because you can't do it on your own. You need a professional organization that will manage the money, fill in the reports, all that stuff. Knows the rules. Know the rules. I can still remember being in Valley Watkins and someone who was the wife of a former grocer who passed away and came in and started wanting scholarship in his name and asked me how much would be for a $500 scholarship. And I said, well, $10,000. She pulled out her checkbook and wrote out me a check right there in the office.
Mm.
And if we hadn't set that up, that would not be possible. So we're just very fortunate in Minnesota to have an organization such as this.
That's wonderful. Well, it's a wonderful story and a wonderful legacy that you've created with your giving, and it's just fantastic to see all the I'm sure the students who now are benefiting from your generosity, as well as the other charities. It's when we think about, especially during these challenging times with COVID and what's been going on, the needs that have been out there, we've just seen so many generous people stepping forward and wanting to help. And so, again, our goal was from the beginning, just supporting you in this process. And it's nice to see a farm, which did so much to help your family during its time, Ellen, actually turned into another asset, that you were able to pay it forward with. So just really, really a wonderful story. And so thank you so much for being here. Anything we didn't ask you or question that maybe we didn't give you a chance to comment on?
You do need to tell people to think about what impact something would have on the rest of your family, because I was surprised after we had sold it and my family didn't know, a cousin of mine who farms the land next to that acreage we sold last contacted me and said, we would like to buy that acreage. She didn't know I'd already sold it. And she had no idea what she'd have to pay, because when we inherited it, it was worth $600 an acre. And now it was worth so much more. She wouldn't have begun to be able to pay that if she didn't know that. And her feelings were hurt. She thought I should have been able to put that land in with the family's other land, with the cousins' land. And it didn't occur to me that I owed an explanation to anyone. And I didn't. I don't lose any sleep over it.
Sure.
But it had never occurred to me. And I don't know how I would have prepared for that in advance, but maybe other people need to think about that in case they have closer family relationships than I do.
Very good point. And I think we've seen that over the years as well. So really, really good point to know that informing family members, and in this case, even extended family members who might have especially been close to that, would have been hindsight's 2020. So, but that's good advice for us going forward as well. It looks like we have a few questions from the audience. So if we have a few minutes yet, we'll see if what those questions are. Sarah, our executive director from Wilmer, will handle the Q&A here.
Well, thank you, Fred and Ellen. for sharing your story. We'll let you take a deep breath because a couple of the questions that have come in via the Q&A and the chat are a little more technical. So we'll start with our staff and Dave with the Real Estate Giving Foundation first, and then if you want to add in, you certainly can. So the first question, I think we'll start with Dave, and this came in via the chat, and that is if you could share a little bit about if there's a lien that is present on property that someone is thinking about gifting, does that preclude them from making a gift of real estate? And then what other restrictions should professional advisors or donors be thinking about as they're considering a potential gift of real estate?
Yeah, I think the idea of if there's a lead, what do we do with it? And you know, Steve's awesome, and it's really why we set the board up. The lead would typically go to Steve, and he would give it a quick litmus test, but then because of the diversity of our board, he kind of throws it out to us and says, hey, what do you think? And you know, he probably, I'm sure he's going to have conversations with the you know, the advisor or, you know, whomever brought the lead to him. But the beauty of the board is then he can kind of throw it out to the board and say, okay, what do we think? Is this something that we're interested in, and what should be our next steps? Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, basically it really does depend on what the potential lead is and what the situation is. Often we will share stories with them initially, even just how others have maybe handled a particular situation. And then of course, the board is tremendous in helping us talk about that. And I do see in the chat, it looks like, was it, you had said lead or lien?
Well, actually, both came in the chat. So, can they have a prearranged sale or a lead on the sale of a property? But then also, if the property is not owned outright, there's still a mortgage or there's a lien on the property. How does that affect the giving strategy?
Well, David, I'll take that if you'd like me to.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I think that's great.
The first piece of the question is if we and the IRS, our understanding is that there can't be any prearranged sale. So therefore, we have time and again had people call us, they already have a purchase agreement on a property, and by then it's usually too late to do a donation of that particular property. So we want to talk to them up front before there is any type of arrangement. And so what we do, just as we did with Ellen and Fred, was the gift happens first, and then we do a sale of the property. So no prearranged sales. The second piece regarding liens, our preference is to not have any liens against the property, and that's just our policy. Now, can somebody gift to a charity a property that has a mortgage against it? Yes, I'm aware of some who've done it, and they have creative techniques and ways to remove that lien. We know of a few resources that actually do that, but the simple answer to that is we prefer that the mortgage and liens against the property are all removed before the gift and the deed is transferred. And again, we can talk through, depending on the situation, as David again referred to at the beginning, about the innovation and the creativity and uniqueness of each situation. We need to know ahead of time what is that individual situation. And sometimes it's just a matter of them using other resources to pay off that mortgage, and then they can go ahead with the donation.
Thank you. This next question in the chat is quite technical, so it'll take me a moment to read that out loud, and then I believe that Steve is going to try and answer that. So the question is that if we have a donor who has a seasonal vacation rental property that is not suitable for year-round living, and it's valued at about $150,000. The property is almost fully depreciated, and this question says if the donor were to sell the property, they believe the donor would have to recapture the depreciation, pay the income tax on that amount, and then capital gains tax on any appreciation less the improvements. So would it be a good strategy to consider, to encourage a donor to consider a charitable remainder trust to avoid some or all of those taxes, not including the annual payout? Well,
I think in this particular case, and we weren't planning to get this detailed in in this particular webinar, I think the first response would be, could you put us in touch with this individual's accountant? Because this really starts revolving around the tax implications for a particular gift with an individual. And then there's so many things that come into play where we do not know an individual's personal situation. Should a person consider a charitable remainder trust? You know, again, the simple answer, yes. Why not? It is a technique and a way in which a charitable gift can be made, provided that the asset is coming without a mortgage, and that we could easily transfer it into a charitable remainder trust, but it could have some tax consequences that, once again, our goal always is to have individuals talk to their individual advisors who know their situation best to advise them. We provide charitable ideas. That's what we do. And we have the skills and the background and the resources with the Real Estate Foundation Board, as well as our own legal counsel, to assess a situation and offer ideas. And then it's up to the individual working with their advisors to see how would this fit given their current situation and whether or not this would have a benefit back to them. There are many other gifting techniques besides a charitable remainder trust. What we've talked about here today was probably the most simple, which is just an outright gift. We also have been involved with doing gifts of undivided interest within a property. So in other words, a partial gift of the asset. We've been involved with what's called a bargain sale arrangement, where they, in essence, are gifting a certain portion of that asset, of the appreciated value. Again, it's a technique that we have worked with and assisted with donors in the process. And then this question directly gets to the life income gifts, which are charitable remainder trusts, and then there's many different variations to charitable remainder trusts, the flip cut, and other very aspects to the trust. And once again, we have wonderful resources to go to depending on the situation.
Thank you, Steve. This is where we would certainly encourage folks to get in touch with our staff from the respective community foundations, or to go ahead and initiate a conversation with the Real Estate Giving, because we can certainly help be part of that problem solving and thinking process. It's part of the concierge level service we provide. So another question just came into the chat, and it goes to a little bit of what Fred and Ellen had experienced early on in their transaction. And that is, if the donated property sells for more than the appraised value, does the donor advised fund get the extra proceeds? And that's what happened for you, correct, Fred?
We didn't get it. It went to the Real Estate Foundation, which then got transferred into the scholarship fund and the donor advised fund. So yes, that was what happened. It went with the whole process.
Right, thank you. And Dave or Steve, what happens in a scenario unlike what Fred and Ellen experienced, where maybe the property actually liquidates or sells for less than the appraised amount? Is there some sort of calculation that needs to be brought into that process?
It's the same in the sense that, you know, if a gift of real estate comes in, and we never know if it's going to sell for the appraised value. The appraised value is just the best guess that a qualified appraiser gives us at the moment it's donated. And then we immediately go to work trying to sell it. And sometimes even if we sell it at the exact appraised price, that full amount isn't even available for charitable gifting because there are some expenses. If we have to pay a realtor, there are some general expenses. If we had to have some legal counsel work, other things that would reduce the amount. But whatever is left then does go to support charitable causes or the donor advised fund as a donor has requested. An aspect to this also that often is talked about is when we receive a gift, we have to complete what's called an 8282 form, which tells the IRS that we received a gift. In this case, from Ellen and Fred, it was appraised at this value, and then we have to report when we sell it to the IRS, and that's the 8283 form. So we have to then reveal to the IRS that we sold it. And if we sold it at a higher price, we sold it at a lower price, there's always a chance that, and again, we would recommend people talk to their advisor about possibly having to adjust their tax deduction for that purpose. But that then just becomes an issue. But again, we refer people back to their advisors.
If I can interject, Steve, you may recall that when I was superintendent in Foley, I had a third home, okay, with 3 homes. And I didn't need the third home, but had higher income than I was expecting. And so we actually gifted that while I was still there. And we did it by percentage over a number of years. So when we finally left, I only had a 1% interest in it, if I remember. And then I finally deeded that 1% off. And then that was in 2010, right after the Great Recession. I think it took you nearly a year to sell that. And actually it sold for less than appraised value. So I had to go back and make some adjustments in my deductions. So yes, that does happen. But that's an instance that hasn't been brought up. You can actually live in your home and actually transfer it over to a charity. Of course, you have no money to give away because you haven't sold anything. Okay, but you can take the tax advantage while you're still living in that.
Absolutely, that's a great point, Fred. And we call that a life estate, and we have received gifts, what we call life estate, where individuals living in their home simply make provisions to gift their home to charity after they've stopped living in it, or after they've passed away, and they get an immediate deduction today, and can continue living in the property. And then after they're done living in the property, it comes to the charity, in this case, the Real Estate Giving, and then we do the liquidation process. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists and our speakers, and especially to Fred and Ellen, our donors, who were willing to share their story today. That does conclude all of our questions. So I will pass it off to my colleague, Carl Samp with the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation for closing comments. Carl?
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to echo your thanks to Ellen, Fred, and Dave for sharing your expertise, as well as Steve. We appreciate having Steve and his vast experience in philanthropy and charitable giving to support all of us in our work. Thank you, everyone who was able to attend today. Just a reminder, this is available for recording on our website, and I'll share that resource in just a second. Know that you can contact your local executive director that's nearest you, and all of our contact information is on the screen right now. If you go to our website, you'll be able to track us down. And this is our website. We have a variety of resources on that website. One that assists people and professional advisors with plan giving, and that is the plangiving.communitygiving.org website. For professional advisor resources, you can see the site there, the ERAD resources. If you want to look at any of our past webinars, including this one, you can find somewhere between probably 30 and 40 webinars that we've done on a variety of topics at communitygiving.org/community-connections. And we also, some of our foundations still have COVID-19 recovery and response funds available. So you'd find the information at that COVID-19 site. We'd love your feedback. If you want to share that, you can do that at info@communitygiving.org. We have a couple of upcoming workshops in the professional advisor arena. On May 20th, we have investment outlook and tax update information. And on June 24th, we have qualified plans and testamentary plan gifts. So those are 2 topics we have lined up. And just an FYI, if you're part of any nonprofit organization or unit of government, I am teaching a grant writing workshop next Tuesday. Today's the last day register, but it's on grant writing with St. Cloud State. So you can get a hold of me and I'd help you get registered for that. So again, thanks everyone, our presenters, and all our team for being part of today's webinar, and we'll look forward to seeing you in future ones. So thank you very much.